"I will take it off just for tonight," whispered the Chinese bride to the lone rancher. Both had a long night ahead. She was wrapped in torn silk, the vibrant red of her wedding tunic stained a deeper crimson where blood seeped through at her thigh. He was a 58-year-old widower who hadn't spoken to a woman in 3 years. When she stumbled onto his ranch at sunset, he had 2 choices. Let her die out there, or bring her inside and face whatever hell was chasing her. Arthur Hayes had been mending fence when he heard the horse. The sound came wrong, hoofbeats uneven and panicked, nothing like the steady rhythm of a rider in control. He looked up from the post he was setting and saw her in the distance, a flash of scarlet against the bruised orange sky. The horse was lathered white with foam, stumbling, and the woman on its back was barely holding on. She made it to the gate before the horse gave out. The animal's front legs buckled and she rolled off sideways, hitting the dirt hard enough that Arthur heard the impact from 30 yards away. The horse stayed down, sides heaving like bellows. The woman tried to stand, got halfway up, and collapsed. Arthur dropped his tools and ran. His boots kicked up dust and his breath came sharp in his chest. He wasn't young anymore and running hurt, but something about the way she'd fallen told him seconds mattered. When he reached her, she was on her side, curled tight, one hand pressed against her leg, where the fine silk was turning black with blood. She looked up at him, and her eyes were dark and wide with pain and fear. Her face was bruised along one cheekbone, her lips split, but what struck him most was the impossible finery of her clothes, even torn and dirt-caked as they were. Her black hair, intricately pinned with what looked like jade ornaments, had come undone and hung in a tangled mass. "Please," she said, her voice a strained whisper. The word came out sharp, accented. "They come." Arthur looked past her at the empty road, at the horizon where the sun was dropping fast. He saw no dust cloud, no riders, but that didn't mean they weren't out there. He looked back at her, at the blood spreading across the ruined silk, at the way her whole body shook. "Can you stand?" he asked. His voice came out rusty from disuse. She tried, got her hands under her, pushed up, and her leg gave out with a cry that was sharp and broken. Arthur moved without thinking, getting his shoulder under her arm, taking as much of her weight as he could. She was lighter than he expected, fine-boned, but solid. He'd spent 40 years working cattle, and his body remembered how to bear weight, even if his back would hate him for it later. Together, they made it to the porch. Each step she took left a red footprint in the dust. By the time he got her through the door, his shirt was soaked with her blood. He helped her to the chair by the table, the sturdy one he'd built from oak because the store-bought furniture always broke. She sat heavily, breath coming in gasps, and he could see now what he'd missed before. Under the torn silk of her tunic was something else, something that wasn't fabric. It was a harness of sorts, made of polished wood and what looked like jade, held together with tight leather straps and brass fittings. It encased her torso, forcing her into an unnaturally rigid posture. The edges had cut into her skin, leaving raw wounds that wept clear fluid. "What is that?" Arthur asked, then caught himself. "Never mind. We need to stop the bleeding first." He moved to the cabinet, pulled out the medical kit he kept for doctoring cattle, and brought it back to the table. His hands were shaking. He hadn't touched another person in 3 years, not since he'd held his wife Helen while she died of the fever that swept through the territory. The memory of her skin going cold under his fingers made him want to drop everything and walk away. But the woman was looking at him with eyes that held the same kind of desperation Helen's had at the end. The look that said, "Please don't let me die alone. Please don't give up on me." Arthur knelt beside her and carefully tore the blood-soaked silk away from her thigh. The wound was deep, a gash that ran from her knee halfway up, edges ragged like something had torn rather than cut. He'd seen injuries like this before, usually on animals that got caught in barbed wire. "This is bad," he said quietly. "Needs stitching. Probably needs a doctor." "No doctor," her voice was firm despite the pain. "No town. They find me." "Who's they?" She closed her eyes, her jaw working. "The man I was to marry. Mr. Thornton. He owns the railroad spur, the mine, everything north of here." My father owed him a great debt. Her eyes opened, burning with something that wasn't just pain. He died. Thornton said I was the payment. I would be his wife. Arthur felt something cold settle in his stomach. He knew of Thornton. A man who took what he wanted and called it business. So you ran, he said. I ran. Took a horse. Rode until it could run no more. She looked down at her leg, at the blood still welling up despite the pressure she was applying. Fence, I think. When the horse jumped. I did not feel it at first. Arthur stood, went to the stove, and started heating water. His mind was racing through options and finding none he liked. If he turned her away, she'd die. If he kept her here and Thornton's men found her, they'd both die. If he took her to town, word would spread before they made it halfway there. While the water heated, he pulled out his sewing kit, the curved needles he used for leatherwork, the strong thread. He'd stitched up cattle before, even stitched up his own leg once after a bad fall. But this was different. This was a woman who'd already been hurt by a man who saw her as something to be owned. I'm going to have to clean it and stitch it closed, he said, not turning around. It's going to hurt. A lot. I know pain. Her voice was steady now. She touched the wooden harness. I have lived in this for a month. It was his wedding gift. To show everyone I belong to him. It binds me. Every breath is shallow. Every move is a reminder. Arthur turned to look at her fully. Then he saw the way she sat, spine unnaturally straight. Saw how the polished wood dug into her flesh, how infection was already darkening the edges of the wounds. That needs to come off, he said. I know. That is why I came here, instead of trying to make it farther. The clasp on the back is jammed. I cannot reach it. I cannot break it. She met his eyes. I will take it off just for tonight. Just long enough to let the wounds heal. Then I will put it back on before I leave. Why would you put it back on? Because without it, he will find me faster. Her voice cracked. It is a collar. A brand. But it is also proof of his claim. Without it, he will just say I am a common thief. With it, at least my story might be heard. Arthur looked at this woman, bleeding and broken in his kitchen, wrapped in a beautiful cage that tortured her, and felt something in his chest that had been frozen since Helen died start to crack. He thought about all the ways people tried to make themselves fit, to survive. You're not property, he said, and was surprised to hear his voice come out firm and clear. And that thing isn't proof of anything except his cruelty. The wounds under there are infected. If we don't take it off and clean them, you'll be dead in a week from blood poisoning. She stared at him, something shifting in her expression. Hope, maybe, or just exhaustion. Can you do it? Remove it. Arthur looked at the harness, at the intricate clasp and tight leather, at the way it had become part of her body. He thought about his tools, about the files and pry bar in the barn, the careful work it would take to remove it without causing more damage. Yeah, he said finally. I can do it. But first, we stop the bleeding in your leg, or you won't live long enough for the rest to matter. The water was boiling now. Arthur poured it into a basin, added carbolic soap, and brought it back to the table. He set the basin down and laid out the needle and thread beside it. This is going to hurt worse than anything you've felt today, he said, looking at her directly. I don't have anything for the pain except whiskey, and you'll need to stay conscious in case they show up. She nodded, her jaw set. Do it. Arthur knelt and began to clean the wound. She went rigid the moment the hot cloth touched raw flesh, her hands gripping the arms of the chair so hard the wood creaked. But she didn't scream, just let out a long, hissing breath through her clenched teeth. He worked as quickly as he could, wiping away blood and dirt. When it was as clean as he could get it, he threaded the curved needle. His hands were steadier now, locked into the task. Ready? He asked. She gave a sharp nod. He pushed the needle through the edge of the torn skin, and she made a sound then, low and animal that hit him like a fist to the gut. But her leg stayed still. She was holding herself motionless through sheer will, and Arthur had to match that will with his own steady hands. He stitched slowly, carefully, pulling the edges together. Sweat dripped down his face. Halfway through, her breathing changed, going shallow. He glanced up and saw her face had gone white. "Stay with me," he said firmly. "Breathe." Her eyes snapped to his face, and she nodded, forcing her breathing to slow. When he tied off the last stitch, his fingers were cramping. He sat back on his heels. The stitches were tight and even. It would scar badly, but she'd keep the leg. "It is done," he said quietly. She looked down at the line of black thread holding her together, and her face crumpled, not from pain, but from a relief so intense it looked like grief. "Thank you," she whispered. Arthur stood, his knees protesting. "Now the harness," she said behind him. He turned. She was already fumbling with the straps on the sides. "I need you to break the clasp in the back," she said. "Once that's off, I can get the rest." He went to the door, looked out at the darkening yard. No sign of riders yet. He grabbed his coat, checked that his rifle was loaded, then went to the barn for his tools. The barn was dark and smelled of hay and horse sweat. He found a small pry bar and a heavy metal file and went back to the cabin, barring the door behind him. She was waiting, standing with obvious effort. "Turn around," he said quietly. She turned her back to him. The clasp was a complex brass mechanism, now bent and jammed tight. The skin around it was raw and weeping. Arthur felt a hot, bitter anger rise in his throat. This was going to hurt. He positioned the tip of the pry bar in a small gap and began to work it, slowly applying pressure. The metal groaned. She gasped, her whole body going rigid, but she didn't fall. With a final, sharp crack, the lock mechanism shattered. The harness loosened immediately. Arthur set down the tools and helped her with the buckles. When the last strap released, she pulled the harness away from her body and dropped it on the floor with a clatter of wood and jade. She stood there, breathing hard, and Arthur could see her ribs expanding fully. She drew in a breath, deep and full, and the sound of it was like someone surfacing after being held underwater. Then another, and another. She turned to face him, tears streaming down her bruised face, and smiled, a real smile, wide and genuine. "Thank you," she said again, the words carrying a weight he felt in his chest. "You gave me back my breath." Arthur looked at the cage lying on the floor. "You should clean those wounds," he managed to say. She nodded and moved to the basin. He turned away to give her privacy, busying himself by the window. "What's your name?" he asked without turning. I'm Arthur Hayes." "You live alone?" 3 years now. "My wife, Helen, died of fever." He heard her move behind him, then her voice came quieter. "I am sorry for your wife. I'm sorry for your father, and for what that man tried to do to you." They were quiet for a moment, two strangers bound by crisis. "Arthur," she said, her tone urgent. He turned. She was standing by the window, looking out. "There is dust on the horizon. They are coming." Arthur moved fast. He grabbed the rifle and positioned himself by the window. The dust cloud was small, maybe 3 riders, still a mile out. "Get away from the window," he said, his voice low. "In the back room. Behind the curtain. Don't make a sound. Let me do the talking." Mai shook her head. "They will not believe you. They will search." She was right. The trap was closing. "There might be another way," Mai said quietly. "Tell them I am your wife. We married years ago. Say I was visiting family. On my way back, I found their horse running wild after it threw its rider. I was hurt trying to catch it. It is thin, but it is better than nothing." It was insane. But he couldn't think of anything better. "Go put on some real clothes," he said. "There's a trunk in the back room. My wife's things. Find something that fits." Mai moved toward the back room, limping badly. Arthur hid the bloody cloths and the broken harness under a torp in the corner. He changed his own blood-stained shirt, throwing the old one into the stove. When Mai emerged, she wore one of Helen's dresses, a simple blue cotton. It was too short and tight across the shoulders, but it was clean, and with her hair quickly braided, she looked less like a fugitive. The sound of hooves stopped outside. A fist pounded on the door. "Open up! We're looking for property belonging to Mr. Thornton." Arthur took a breath, squeezed Mai's hand once, then opened the door. 3 men stood on his porch, armed. The one in front had a hard, cruel face. "I'm Fisk," he said. "We're tracking a woman." "Chinese. Stole one of Mr. Thornton's horses." "Haven't seen anyone like that," Arthur said, his voice level. Fisk's eyes moved past him, scanning the cabin. "That your horse in the barn?" The one lathered up. "That's my wife's horse," Arthur said. "She was out visiting family. Horse got spooked on the way back. Ran itself half to death. Nearly killed my wife in the process." "Your wife?" Fisk sneered. "That's right. Mai, come here." Mai appeared, limping heavily. She looked at the 3 men with weary distrust. Fisk's eyes narrowed. "You're the one. The dress is different, but you're the 1 inch. This is my wife, Mai Hayes," Arthur said, stepping slightly in front of her. "We were married 2 years ago. I've got the papers to prove it." The lie hung in the air. He didn't have papers, not for her. But Mai moved past him to a small wooden box on a shelf, one where Helen had kept their important documents. She pulled out a folded piece of paper and handed it to Fisk without hesitation. Arthur's heart hammered as Fisk unfolded it. He remembered Helen's careful script on their marriage certificate. Mai must have found it. But how could she have changed it? Fisk studied the paper for a long time. "This says you married Mai Lin from San Francisco 2 years ago." "That's right," Arthur said, praying his voice stayed steady. "And you expect me to believe that the woman we're tracking, Mr. Thornton's runaway bride, just happens to be your long-lost wife?" "I expect you to believe what's written on legal paper," Arthur said, letting steel come into his voice. "Now get off my property. My wife is injured and needs rest." Fisk stared at him, then at Mai. For a moment, Arthur thought he'd call the bluff. But then Fisk folded the paper and handed it back. "We'll be checking the records in town, old man," he said quietly. "If we find out you lied, we'll be back. And Mr. Thornton will not be as polite as I've been." He turned and walked off the porch, his men following. Arthur closed the door and barred it, turning to find Mai sliding down the wall, her face white. "How did you do that?" he asked. "The paper." "In the trunk," she whispered. There was ink and a pen. In the dark, they could not see the new writing was imperfect. The name on the paper was Mary. "I only had to change 1 letter." She looked up at him, her eyes dark with exhaustion. "We bought maybe a day." He helped her to the bed. "Rest," he said. "I'll keep watch." Arthur sat in the chair by the window all night, rifle across his lap, watching the darkness. He felt more awake than he had in years, like some part of him that had been sleeping since Helen died had finally opened its eyes again. When the first grey light touched the horizon, he made coffee. Mai sat up slowly, wincing as she moved. "They did not come back," she said. "Not yet," Arthur replied, handing her a cup. "But they will. They'll check the records." "What do we do?" He had been asking himself that all night. They could run, lose everything he and Helen had built. Or they could stay and fight a battle they couldn't win. "We could leave," he said quietly. "Head for California. Disappear." Mai looked at him. "You would give up your home for me?" "A stranger." "This stopped being about strangers the moment I stitched up your leg," Arthur said. "And this is just a place. Maybe it's time I started living somewhere else." Her eyes filled with tears that she blinked back hard. "Why? Why do this for me?" Because 12 hours ago you were dying and I could help, he said simply. And now you're living, and I can still help. I don't need a better reason. She reached across the table and took his hand. Then we go together. But not running, her voice grew firm. We go to town. We file a real marriage license. We make the lie true. Arthur stared at her. You want to marry me? For real? I want to be free of that man, she said, her grip tightening on his hand. And I want to repay the man who gave me back my body and didn't ask for anything in return. A marriage of convenience. Partners. We watch each other's backs. Maybe we build something real. It was insane. They barely knew each other. But he looked at this woman who'd survived a cage, who'd chosen to run rather than be owned, who'd had the strength to lie to armed men, and he thought maybe insane was exactly what his life needed. All right, he said. We do it today. Before they come back. The ride to town took 2 hours. At the courthouse, the clerk looked at them like they were creatures from another world, the quiet, aging rancher and the beautiful, bruised Chinese woman who towered over most men in spirit if not in height. But the paperwork was legal, the fee was paid, and an hour later, they walked out as man and wife. On the courthouse steps, Mai stopped and looked down at him. I will be a good wife to you, Arthur Hayes. A faithful partner. And I'll be a good husband to you, Mai Hayes, he replied, meeting her gaze. And I'll never try to make you smaller than you are. She smiled then, a real smile, bright and genuine, and bent down to kiss his cheek. Then we have a chance. They did have a chance. Thornton would still come. The town would still talk. Life would still be hard. But they would face it together. Two people who'd learned that sometimes salvation comes wrapped in torn silk and blood, and that the best partnerships are forged in a single, long night, when two strangers choose to save each other instead of themselves.